I don't even know what time it is. Doesn't matter, I suppose. Sleep doesn't come the way it used to. I just sit here most nights in this chair with the lamp on low and the house so quiet I can hear the refrigerator running in the other room. Been sitting in this chair a long time. Years, maybe. The same chair, the same dark, the same thoughts circling back around like they always do. I'm going to tell you something tonight. Something I've never told anybody straight through. I've told pieces of it, dropped a word here, left a sentence there, but I've never sat down and said the whole thing out loud. Not even to myself. Not really. I was married once, for 22 years, to a woman named Dolores, and I had a best friend. His name was Calvin. And what happened between the three of us, what I found out, what I did about it, what it cost me, that's what I want to talk about tonight. Because I'm old now. 71 years old, this past March. And I can feel things winding down the way you feel a season changing. Something in the air, something in the joints. And I don't want to carry this to the ground without saying it out loud, at least once. So I'm going to say it. All of it. Dolores came into my life in 1978. I was 24 years old, working at a printing company on the east side of the city, running a press machine 6 days a week, saving money, trying to figure out what kind of man I was going to be. I wasn't much to look at. Skinny. Serious face. My mother always said I looked like I was doing math even when I was sleeping. Dolores was not the kind of woman you walked past without stopping, not because of anything flashy. She wasn't loud. She didn't dress to be looked at. She had this stillness about her, this way of standing in a room like she'd already decided she belonged there and didn't need your permission. I saw her at a cookout at my cousin Raymond's house. She was talking to someone by the fence, holding a cup with both hands. And she laughed at something and then looked over, not at me specifically, just looked up. And I felt something move in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. I introduced myself that same afternoon. She looked at me for a long moment before she answered, like she was deciding something, and then she said, "I know who you are. Raymond talks about you all the time." And I didn't know whether that was a good thing or not, so I just nodded and tried to look like I did. We spent the whole cookout talking, just us, off to the side, while the music played and people ate and kids ran around. We talked about everything and nothing, where she grew up, what she wanted, what I wanted. I told her I wanted to own something one day, a business, a house, something I could point to and say I built that. She nodded slowly and said, "I respect a man with a direction." I drove home that night, thinking about her the whole way. Calvin had been my best friend since we were 11 years old. Since the third week of 6th grade, when some boys tried to jump me behind the gymnasium and Calvin walked over and stood next to me without saying a word, just stood there, like it was the most natural thing in the world. They left, and he and I walked home together that afternoon, and we talked the whole way, and that was it. That was the beginning of something that lasted 3 decades. He was the best man at my wedding. He was standing next to me the day Dolores walked down that aisle. He handed me the ring. He gave a speech at the reception that made my mother cry. He talked about loyalty, about what a real friend looked like, about how a man like me deserved every good thing life had to offer. I'm sitting here now thinking about that speech. Calvin was a talker, always had been, charming in that easy way that some men have, where the words just come out smooth, and people lean in. He could make strangers feel like old friends in 10 minutes. Women liked him. Men liked him too, because he never seemed to be working at it. It was just who he was, or who I thought he was. The first years of my marriage were good years. Hard sometimes, the way all real things are hard, but good. Dolores and I argued about money, and about time, and about the small, irritating habits that only become visible when you share a roof with somebody. She was neat in ways I wasn't. I was quiet in ways that frustrated her. She wanted me to talk more. I thought I talked plenty. We went in circles about that for years. But there was something real between us. Something I still can't fully describe. An understanding that didn't always need words. A way of being in the same room that felt right. I'd come home from work and she'd be in the kitchen, not making a fuss, not performing anything, just there. And I'd feel something settle in me the way a drawer slides shut and clicks into place. Calvin was around all the time in those years. He was single for most of them, or close enough to single that it amounted to the same thing. He'd come over for dinner 2 or 3 times a week. He and Dolores got along well. They teased each other, had this banter going that I enjoyed watching. It felt like family. It felt like exactly the kind of life I'd been trying to build. I should tell you, I trusted them both completely. I should tell you there was not a single part of me that worried about them together. I should tell you that, and then you'll understand what came later. Our son Marcus was born in 1983. He came into the world at 2 in the morning, making the most serious face I'd ever seen on a newborn. The doctor laughed and said he looked like he had opinions already. I held him in the delivery room, and I cried. I'm not ashamed of that. I stood there, holding this 7-pound person who was mine, who came from me, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a boy. Calvin was the first person I called. He came to the hospital the next morning with flowers and a ridiculous stuffed bear that was nearly as big as Dolores. He held Marcus like he'd been holding babies his whole life. He stood at that window looking at my son and said, "Man, look what you made." And there was something in his voice, something genuine, something warm, that I held on to for years as proof of who he was. I've thought about that moment many times since. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't arrive the way you expect. You think it'll be obvious. You think there'll be a moment where something clicks and you see clearly. But it doesn't work like that. It comes in pieces, small pieces that don't mean anything on their own. A piece here, a piece there, and you collect them without knowing you're collecting them. And then one day you have enough pieces to see the shape of the thing, and by then it's already been going on for a long time. The first piece was in 1997. Marcus was 14. Dolores and I had been married for almost 19 years. Calvin had finally settled down with a woman named Patricia, though that relationship had the kind of instability that made everyone nervous. I'd started my own small business by then, a printing and copy shop, nothing grand, but mine. I was working long hours, coming home tired. Dolores had gone back to working too, at an insurance office downtown. We were like ships in a harbour, docked close but moving in and out on our own schedules. I came home early one afternoon. Machine broke down at the shop, sent everyone home at 2 o'clock. I walked into my house and Dolores was on the phone in the kitchen. She had her back to me. I heard her laughing, not her regular laugh, a lighter version of it something more careful, and she was saying something low that I couldn't quite catch. When she heard me come in, she turned around and said into the phone, "Okay, talk to you later." And then she hung up and smiled at me and said, "You're home early." I said the machine broke. She said that was too bad. And that was it. That was the whole thing. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't think to ask. Why would I? It was the middle of the afternoon, and my wife was on the phone in our kitchen. People are on the phone. That's not a thing. But something stayed with me. Not suspicion exactly. More like a small, quiet irritation. A grain of sand. Nothing you'd pick out and examine. Just something that sat there and didn't quite dissolve. The second piece came a few months later. Calvin and I were at a bar. Just the two of us, the way we used to do on Friday evenings, when the week had ground us down. And I was talking about Dolores, about something ordinary. I don't even remember what. And Calvin nodded, but he was looking at his glass, not at me. And when I finished talking, he didn't say anything for a moment, just turned his glass around in his hands. I remember asking him if he was all right. He said he was fine, just tired. I believed him. There were other pieces over the months that followed. The way a conversation would stop when I entered a room. The way Dolores started keeping her phone face down on the nightstand, which she'd never done before. The way Calvin started coming around a little less. And when he did come around, there was something careful about him. Like he was measuring what he said before he said it. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being one of those men who sees shadows everywhere. I'd seen what that kind of thinking did to people, seen it poison good relationships for no reason. I didn't want to be that man. I'd always prided myself on trust, on not being suspicious, on taking people at face value until they gave me a real reason not to. So I pushed it down. For 2 more years I pushed it down. And then one Tuesday morning in 1999, a Tuesday, of all days, the most ordinary day of the week, I found out. I wasn't looking. I want you to understand that. I was not snooping. I was not following anyone. I was not checking phones or going through pockets. I was simply in the right place at the wrong time. Or the wrong place at the right time. I've never figured out which way to say it. Dolores had left her day planner on the kitchen table. An actual paper planner. This was 1999. People still kept those things. She'd gone to take a shower. I was sitting at the table eating breakfast, and her planner was open right in front of me, and my eye caught something that wasn't meant for me to see. A name. His name. A time. A place. Just 3 lines. Just an address I didn't recognize. And Calvin's name written in her handwriting, and a time on a Saturday 3 weeks back, circled. I sat very still for a long time. I heard the shower running. I heard birds outside. I heard the refrigerator, the same refrigerator that's running right now in this other room, decades later. I sat with those 3 lines in front of me, and I felt something moving through me that I don't have a good word for. Not hot, not explosive. Something colder than that. Something that started in the center of my chest and moved outward slowly, the way water soaks through cloth. I closed the planner. I finished my breakfast. When Dolores came downstairs, I said good morning. She said good morning. She poured her coffee. She picked up her planner from the table and put it in her bag and went to work. And I sat there alone in my kitchen for a long time after she left. I didn't confront her that day. I know people find that strange. I've had people ask me over the years, people I've mentioned pieces of this to, and they always want to know why I didn't just say something. Go after her right then, demand answers, explode the whole thing, open on the spot. And I understand that impulse. I felt that impulse. But that morning, sitting in my kitchen with my coffee going cold, what I felt was not the urge to explode. What I felt was the urge to know everything first. I am not an impulsive man. I never have been. I work slowly. I think before I act. My father used to say the difference between a reaction and a response is time, and that time was always on the side of the man who could wait. I didn't always agree with my father, but on that morning, sitting in that kitchen, I understood what he meant. I needed to know the full shape of the thing before I decided what to do about it. So I started paying attention in a different way. Not frantically, not obsessively, just carefully. The way you pay attention to something once you've decided it matters. I started noticing how often Calvin called the house. I started remembering conversations, going back over them in my mind, looking for the things I'd missed the first time. I started paying attention to when Dolores said she had to stay late at work, and I started noting those evenings and whether she came home with the specific kind of tiredness I was learning to recognize. I watched them together at a dinner party at my cousin Raymond's house. Raymond again, full circle, the way life turns. And I watched them with new eyes, and what I saw was a performance, a very good performance. They didn't look at each other too much. They talked to each other the way acquaintances talk, light and easy, nothing underneath it. But there was a moment when Dolores said something funny, and Calvin laughed. And the way he looked at her in the second after the laughter faded. Just a fraction of a second, just a glance, told me everything I needed to know. I stood across the room holding my drink, and I looked at my best friend, looking at my wife, and I understood that this was not new. This had been going on for years. I don't know exactly when that understanding settled into certainty. It wasn't one single moment. It was a process, like developing a photograph, the image forming slowly in the liquid until it becomes undeniable. And once it was undeniable, once I had held it up and looked at it from every angle and could not find a way to explain it away, something in me changed, not broke, changed. There's a difference. Though I know the line is thin, I started making a plan. I want to be honest about this part. I want to be as honest about this as I've been about everything else, because this is the part that followed me the longest. This is the part I've had to sit with all these years. I made a plan that was not a good man's plan. I knew it wasn't a good man's plan while I was making it, and I made it anyway, because I was not, in that season of my life, trying to be a good man. I was trying to be a man who didn't just sit quietly while the two people he loved most in the world treated him like he was nothing, like he was furniture in his own life, like he didn't see, didn't know, didn't count. They thought I didn't know. That was the thing that burned the hottest, not just the betrayal itself, but the fact that they looked at me every day, looked me in the eye, ate at my table, laughed at my jokes, took my trust, and believed I was too blind or too simple to see what was right in front of me. I was going to show them I saw. The plan took shape over several months. I wasn't rushing. I had to keep going to work, keep coming home, keep being the same man I'd always been on the surface. That was harder than I expected. You don't know what you're made of until you have to sit across a dinner table from the person who's been lying to you for years and ask them how their day was. You don't know what kind of discipline lives in you until you have to laugh at your best friend's joke when what you want to do is something else entirely. But I did it. Night after night, I did it. And I watched. And I waited. And I built my plan the way I built everything. Carefully, methodically, one piece at a time. The first thing I did was money. Now this sounds cold, and I know it sounds cold, but you have to understand what I understood by then. A separation was coming, a divorce was coming, and I had built something. I had spent 20+ years building a life and a business and a stability, and I was not going to walk away from that with nothing while they got to walk away whole. I started moving money. Not all of it. Not in ways that would be obvious. Small amounts regularly to an account that existed only in my name. I'd opened it without telling Dolores. I was careful. I took my time. I'm not proud of this exactly, but I'm not ashamed of it either. It was self-preservation. It was a man looking at what was coming and making sure he wouldn't be destroyed by it. The second thing was documentation. I hired a private investigator. His name was a Polish name I could never quite pronounce, and he charged me $600 a week, and he was very good at his job. I told him only what he needed to know. He didn't need to know how I felt about it. He didn't need to know how long I'd been carrying it. He just needed to know where to look and what to look for. He found plenty. The photographs he brought me were not the kind I can describe in detail without my chest tightening even now. I'll just say he confirmed what I already knew, and then some. There was a hotel they used, a specific hotel 20 minutes from where we lived, not an expensive place, which somehow made it worse. The ordinariness of it. The way they'd built a whole routine. A Tuesday thing, from what he could tell. Tuesdays, while I was at the shop. While I was running the business that paid for the house, they both ate dinner in on Sundays. I paid the man, and I put the photographs in my car in an envelope, and I drove to the park near my shop, and I sat in the parking lot for an hour. I cried. I'm not going to skip that part. I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my father died. Not from sadness exactly, from a kind of grief that's different from sadness. Grief for something I'd believed in. Grief for a version of my life that I'd been living inside and that had been hollow the whole time without me knowing. Grief for the Calvin I thought I had, for the Dolores I thought I had, for the 22 years that were real to me in a way they apparently were not real to them. I sat there until it passed. Then I drove back to work. Marcus was 16 by then. I need to tell you about Marcus in all of this, because he was always the most important part of the equation for me. The thing I had to be most careful about. My son was 16 years old, and whatever I was about to do, whatever I was planning, I needed him to come through it with as little damage as possible. That was the one rule I set for myself that I never broke. Marcus could not be a casualty of this. He was already a serious young man. Serious the way he'd been serious since the delivery room. He got good grades without being told. He played basketball, but studied harder than he practiced. He had a quiet dignity about him that I could see, even then, was going to take him places. He looked like me, but he had Dolores's stillness. That way of standing in a room. He'd gotten the best parts of both of us, which is a thing you don't fully appreciate until it's almost too late. I thought about him constantly as I made my plan. Everything I did, I ran it through the filter of Marcus first. The third thing I did, and this is the part I've turned over most in the years since, was the actual revenge itself. And I use that word knowing exactly what it sounds like. Revenge. It sounds like something small and bitter. It sounds like something a lesser man does. I've thought about that. I've sat with that word for decades, and I've never found a better one. So I'll use it honestly and let it mean what it means. I made arrangements to end both relationships at the same time, publicly. I chose a Sunday dinner. Calvin came to our house for Sunday dinner regularly, had for years. It was one of those rituals that had built up slowly and become a fixed thing. Dolores cooked. I grilled if the weather allowed. Marcus would usually be there if he didn't have something going on. It was the most ordinary domestic version of our lives, the most normal thing we had. I chose that setting on purpose. I invited Patricia too, Calvin's girlfriend, the one he'd been on and off with for years. I called her and told her Calvin had mentioned wanting to celebrate something, and I thought it would be nice to have her there. She was happy to come. She had no idea. I've felt guilty about Patricia ever since, if I'm honest. She was as blind as I was. She didn't deserve to be part of it. But I needed her there. I also invited my cousin Raymond and his wife, and my neighbor James and his wife. I made it a larger thing, told Dolores I wanted to do a proper dinner, invited some people, made it sound spontaneous and warm. She seemed pleased. She went to some effort with the food that Sunday. I remember watching her in the kitchen that morning, moving around in her apron, cooking the way she cooked when she wanted to show something, and I stood in the doorway and watched her and felt something I still can't untangle. Grief and anger and love all pressed together into something that had no name. I watched her cook my food in my kitchen for the last time, and I didn't say a word. The envelope with the photographs was under the driver's seat of my car. The dinner started the way those dinners always started. People settling in, drinks getting poured, conversations crossing each other. Raymond was loud the way he'd always been loud. Patricia was quieter than usual, or maybe I was just reading too much into everything. Marcus was upstairs until I called him down. Calvin arrived last, the way he often did, and he came in like he always came in, like he owned a piece of every room he walked into. He hugged Dolores in the kitchen, and I watched it, this hug I'd watched 100 times before. And now I watched it differently, and it was extraordinary how different it looked when you knew what you knew. The half-second longer than it needed to be. The way his hand pressed at the small of her back and then lifted. He shook my hand when he came to me. My best friend since 6th grade shook my hand and looked me in the eye and smiled and said it smelled good in here. I smiled back and said Dolores had been cooking all morning. We sat down to eat. The food was good. Dolores had outdone herself. The conversation moved around the table the way it does when you have the right people in a room. Raymond told a story that made everyone laugh. Patricia talked about her job. Marcus ate quietly and answered questions politely and looked like he wanted to be somewhere else, the way 16-year-olds always look. I waited. I waited until we were between the main course and dessert, when people were settled and full and comfortable, and the evening felt like it was winding down into that pleasant end of dinner warmth. I waited until everyone had their drinks, and the table was half cleared, and the energy was easy and unguarded. Then I stood up. They thought I was going to make a toast. That's what it looked like. Man standing up with his glass. end of a nice dinner. Raymond raised his glass preemptively. Calvin smiled. I said, I want to say something to everyone at this table tonight. I want to thank you all for being here. And I want to be honest with you, because I think honesty is the most important thing a man can offer the people he loves. I looked at Dolores when I said the word loves. I looked at Calvin. I went to the kitchen and I came back with the envelope. I want you to understand that I had thought about this moment for months. I had imagined it from every angle. I had rehearsed it in my car, in the shower, lying awake at 3 a.m. And when the actual moment arrived, it was nothing like the rehearsal. It was quieter. It was almost gentle, in a strange way. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't dramatic. I just stood at my own dinner table, and I placed those photographs in the center of it, and I said in a completely calm voice that I wanted everyone to know what had been happening in my home. The silence that fell was the loudest silence I've ever heard. Patricia made a sound I still hear sometimes. Raymond went very still. Marcus looked at me, and I looked back at him, and I held his gaze for just a moment, and then I looked away because I couldn't hold it. Calvin didn't move. He sat completely still, with his hands flat on the table, and he looked at the photographs. And then he looked at me, and his face was doing something I'd never seen it do before. Something that was almost indistinguishable from grief. Dolores stood up. She didn't say anything immediately. She stood up from the table, and she looked at me for a long time, and her face was doing something I could not read, something I'm still not sure I understand, something that was more complicated than guilt or anger or shame, something that had several things in it at once. And then she walked out of the dining room, and I heard her on the stairs, and I heard the bedroom door close. I poured myself more wine. I sat down. I said to everyone at the table, the ones who were still sitting there, which was everyone except Dolores, and almost except Calvin, who looked like he was deciding whether to stand, I said, I'm sorry you had to see this. I want to be clear that none of you did anything wrong tonight. I just needed to stop pretending. Raymond said my name. Just my name. Nothing attached to it. Patricia had started crying. Calvin finally stood up. He stood up, and he looked at me across the table, and there was something on his face that I think was shame. I think it was, and he said my name too. And then he said he was sorry. That was it. That was all he said. 30 years. 30 years of friendship, of standing by each other, of being in each other's corners through every hard thing life threw at us. 30 years, and the sum of what he had to offer in that moment was 2 words. I said, I know you are. You should go. He went. Patricia went after him. Not with him, that was clear. She left without saying anything. I heard her car start in the driveway. Raymond and his wife stayed another hour. They didn't know what to say, and neither did I. So we mostly sat there with the remains of the dinner and talked about nothing, and that was actually a kindness. I see that now. Just 2 people staying in the room so I wouldn't be alone in it. Marcus never came back downstairs. I let him be. I cleaned up the kitchen by myself that night. Dolores didn't come out of the bedroom. I heard her moving around up there, heard what I was fairly sure were her crying, though she had always been a person who cried quietly. I washed the dishes and dried them and put them away. I wiped down the counters. I turned off the lights downstairs one by one, and then I went and slept on the couch. Not because she'd pushed me out. She hadn't said a word. I just wasn't ready to be in that room. I wasn't ready to be that close to her. I lay on the couch in the dark and listened to the house settle around me and thought about absolutely nothing. My mind was very empty, like a room somebody just moved out of. I had expected to feel something triumphant. I had built toward this moment for months. I had planned it, staged it, executed it exactly as I'd intended. I had not lost my temper. I had not been petty or loud. I had laid the truth out on the table in front of everyone, and I had held myself with a dignity I was proud of. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like a man who had just burned down his own house and was standing outside in the dark, watching it go. The next part of the plan had been running quietly in the background for those same months, the financial preparations. I had spent weeks with a lawyer, a woman named Denise, who came recommended by someone at my church, a small, quiet woman with reading glasses who asked very exact questions and wrote down everything I said in a small notebook. She had helped me understand what I was entitled to, what I could protect, what the process would look like. I had also called in a favor from a man named Earl, who ran an equipment company I did business with, and Earl had some connections in the commercial real estate side of things that I needed. I'd been watching a property, a small commercial property on a block that was starting to attract attention, the kind of block that's about to become something. You could see it happening. I'd had my eye on it for over a year. I'd been slow walking the financing while I waited to see what direction things would go. I moved on it the same week as the dinner, bought it in my name only. The money I'd been quietly moving into that separate account over the preceding months went toward the down payment. My lawyer made sure the paperwork was clean and clear. That building is still mine today. It's worth 8 times what I paid for it. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because it's part of the full picture. Because revenge isn't only what you do to hurt someone else. It's also what you do to make sure they can't take you down with them when they go. It's the thing you build while they think you're not looking. It's the way you make sure that when the dust settles, you're still standing. The divorce was filed 6 weeks after that Sunday dinner. It was not clean. Divorces after 22 years, with shared assets and a shared business and a 16-year-old child, are never clean. Dolores had her own lawyer. The conversations were handled mostly through those lawyers. We said almost nothing to each other for months, except what was required for Marcus. Marcus. I need to stop and spend some time on Marcus, because I've been moving past him, and that isn't right. He came downstairs the next morning, and I was at the kitchen table with coffee. He sat down across from me, and he looked at me, and he said, "Dad." Just that. "Dad." And I looked back at him, and I said, "I know." And we sat there for a long time, and then I said, "None of this changes anything about me and you. I need you to hear that clearly." He nodded. He didn't cry. He was 16, and he was trying to be a man, and he was not ready to be a man, and he was trying anyway. I recognized that. I'd done the same thing at his age. He said he'd always thought Calvan was good people. I said I had too. He nodded again. He asked if we were going to lose the house. I told him we were not going to lose the house. I told him I had made sure of that. I told him his life was going to change in some ways, but he was not going to lose the things that mattered. And I meant it. And I made it true. He graduated high school 2 years later. He went to college on a partial scholarship. and I covered the rest. He became an engineer. He lives in Atlanta now, with his wife and 2 daughters. We talk every week without fail. He is the best thing that came out of that marriage. He is the best thing that came out of my life, if I'm honest. And the relationship I have with him today, that closeness, that straightforwardness we have with each other, I think some of that came from that Sunday morning at the kitchen table. From sitting with him in the truth of what was happening instead of trying to protect him from it. I didn't tell him all of it, but I told him enough. I'm getting old enough now to think about legacy, about what you leave behind. And I know Marcus saw something in me during those years, not just the anger and the hurt, but the way I moved through it, the way I kept getting up and going to the shop and taking care of business and being present for him. I hope that's part of what he carries, the part where his father didn't fall apart. Because I wanted to fall apart. There were nights during that period, months after the dinner, when the divorce was grinding along, and I was living in a rental apartment 4 miles from the house I'd built while we figured out the settlement. There were nights in that apartment that were as dark as any I've known. I'd lie in that bed, in that anonymous room, and feel the full weight of it. 22 years. My best friend since the 6th grade. The family I'd built. All of it dismantled, and not even by some stranger. By the 2 people I'd trusted more than anyone alive. Those nights were long, but I got up every morning. I want to tell you about the one time Calvan tried to speak to me directly, because it matters. About 3 months after the dinner, I was at the shop late on a Friday evening. Everyone had gone home. I was catching up on some paperwork, the overhead lights dim, just my desk lamp on. I heard a knock on the glass door. It was Calvin. He stood outside the glass, and he didn't look the way he used to look. He looked smaller somehow. His shoulders were different. He'd lost some weight. He held up his hand when I looked up. Not a wave exactly, just a gesture, a request. I let him in because I wanted to, because something in me needed to hear whatever he was going to say. I didn't know if it was going to be an argument or an explanation or an apology, and I needed to find out which one it was. I sat behind my desk. I didn't offer him a seat. He stood in the middle of the floor, and he started talking. He told me it had started years ago. He told me it had started slowly, the way things like that do, small things building on each other, and by the time it had become what it was, he was already too far into it to see clearly. He said he hated himself for it. He said he had told himself 100 different lies to justify it, and he knew they were all lies. He said losing my friendship was the worst consequence of his life. He said he knew I didn't want to hear any of this. He was right. I didn't. But I let him finish. And when he finished, there was silence for a while, and I looked at him standing there in the middle of my shop. This man I had stood next to at school and at games and at funerals and at my wedding. This man I had called my brother in all but blood for 30 years, and I felt something that surprised me. Not forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. Not forgiveness, not then. Something more like recognition. Like looking at someone you used to know. I told him I heard him. I told him that what he'd said didn't undo anything. I told him I wasn't going to pretend it did. I told him that the friendship we'd had was something I was going to mourn for the rest of my life, and that he'd taken it away, and there was no speech in the world that could give it back. He nodded. He looked at the floor. I told him to go home. He left. I sat in my shop alone for a long time after that. The city dark outside the windows, the papers on my desk, the quiet hum of the machines in the back. I sat there, and I thought about the 6th grade. I thought about the boys behind the gymnasium. I thought about a skinny 11-year-old kid who walked over and stood next to me without being asked. And I thought about all the years that came after. And I thought about the hotel 20 minutes from our house on Tuesday afternoons. All of it in the same person. That's the thing about people that the simple stories never capture. The same person who stood by you at your worst can be the person who does the worst things to you. People are not cleanly one thing or cleanly another. Calvin was my truest friend for decades, and he was the man in those photographs. Both things were real. I've had to live with both things being real. The divorce was finalized in 2001. The settlement was not as clean as I'd have liked, but it was better than it might have been. I kept the business. The house was sold, and the equity split. Dolores moved to a smaller place on the other side of the city. She had her job, her income, her life. She didn't disappear. We co-parented Marcus, awkwardly and carefully, for 2 more years until he graduated. We were civil. We were not warm, but we were civil. I never stopped feeling the loss of her. That's the other thing about betrayal that the simple stories don't tell you. The person who betrayed you was still someone you loved. The loss of them is still a real loss. I was furious at Dolores. I was done with Dolores. And I still missed her in the middle of the night, the way you miss a limb. Not what she'd become to me at the end, but who she was at the beginning. Who she was at Raymond's cousin's cookout with her cup held in both hands. Who she was the morning Marcus was born. I miss that Dolores had been real. I don't know what happened to her. I've never fully understood how a person goes from that to the hotel 20 minutes from home. Maybe I had something to do with it. I've thought about that too. I was not an easy man to be married to. I worked too much. I was quiet in ways that left her alone, even when I was in the room. She had told me she needed more, and I had heard her, and told myself I was giving enough, and I was probably not giving enough. I've thought about that, not as an excuse for what she did, but as part of the full picture. The thing about looking back, honestly, is that you have to look at all of it, not just the parts that make you the victim. I wasn't only a victim, but I also wasn't the one who made the choice she made. And those two things can both be true. I never remarried. I had a few relationships in the years that followed, one of them serious enough that I think about it sometimes. A woman named Genevieve, who was patient and warm, and who I let go of eventually, for reasons I couldn't fully explain at the time and understand better now. I wasn't ready to trust in the way a real relationship requires. I'd built a wall that I didn't realize was there until I was already on the other side of it alone. I think about Genevieve sometimes. The commercial property I bought the week of the dinner eventually became the anchor of a small portfolio. I bought 2 more properties over the following decade. Nothing spectacular. Modest buildings, modest income, but steady. The printing shop I eventually sold in 2010 to a man who'd worked for me for 12 years and wanted to take it over. I sold it to him at a fair price, below market, because he'd been loyal, and I knew what loyalty cost. I'm comfortable now. Not rich. Comfortable. Calvin died in 2018. Heart attack. He was 63 years old. I heard it through Raymond, who kept connections with both of us even through everything. I sat with that news for several days. I didn't go to the funeral. I'm still not sure whether that was the right thing. Part of me wanted to go. Part of me felt that standing at Calvan's grave was something I was owed, not in a mean way, but in the way that presence at someone's end is a kind of final acknowledgement that they were real to you, that they mattered. In the end, I didn't go. I sat in this house instead. I moved back to the original neighborhood, different house, 2 blocks from where I used to live. And I sat in this chair and I thought about Calvin, and I let myself feel what I felt, which was grief, plain, uncomplicated grief. Not anger anymore. That had been gone for years. Just grief for what he was and what he could have been and what he chose to throw away. I said some words out loud to the empty room. I don't remember exactly what I said. Something that felt like goodbye. Something that felt like, despite everything, I hope you found some peace at the end. I meant it. Dolores I see occasionally. We are not close, but we are not enemies. At Marcus's wedding 6 years ago, we sat in the same room and held our grandson. Granddaughter then, she was just a baby, and we were in the same photograph. She looked older, the way we all look older. She was with someone, a man she's been with for years, who seemed decent. I shook his hand. I was polite. I was genuinely polite. Not performed polite. She and I stepped outside for a few minutes during the reception, just to get some air. We stood on the venue's porch and looked out at the parking lot and the trees beyond it, and we didn't say much at first. And then she said she was glad Marcus had turned out so well. I agreed that we had done something right there. She said, and I'll carry this always. She said, I know I don't have a right to ask you this, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I've been sorry for a long time. I nodded. I said I knew that. I said it had taken me a long time to get to a place where it didn't destroy me, but I'd gotten there. She said she was glad. We went back inside, and the evening went on, and Marcus danced with his wife, and I sat at my table with Raymond, who is old now and slow-moving but still loud when he wants to be, and I watched my son dance, and I thought about everything that had happened to get to that room. All the years, all the choices, all the things I did, right and wrong. The money I moved quietly. The photographs I laid on the table. The plan I made in the cold months of 1998 and 1999, while I kept going to work and kept coming home and kept pretending I didn't know what I knew. All of it. The long winter of it. The way it changed me. In ways I still feel when I try to let someone close. I don't know if I'd do it the same way. That's not me saying I was wrong, exactly. I was wronged. I was badly wronged by the 2 people who knew me most completely in the world. And I found a way to face it that let me keep standing, that let me keep my business and my property and my dignity and my son. But the public dinner, the photographs on the table, with Patricia sitting there who had done nothing wrong, with Raymond who didn't need to see that, with Marcus upstairs who had to hear the silence that fell over that house. I've thought about whether there was a quieter way to handle it, a less theatrical way, a way that was less about being seen and more about actually protecting myself and moving on. And I think there was. And I think I was not at that time interested in the quieter way. I wanted to be seen. I wanted them to be seen. I wanted there to be a moment where the truth sat in the room with everyone. and no one could pretend anymore. I was tired of pretending. I had pretended for 2 years already, smile and handshake and pass the bread. And I was finished with pretending, and I wanted them to be finished with pretending too. Was that revenge? Yes, that was revenge. Was it also something else? Was it also a man who had been made invisible in his own life, demanding to be visible? I think maybe it was both things at the same time. I think most of the things I did in my life have been more than one thing at the same time, and I've had to learn to hold that without needing to simplify it. It's late. The refrigerator's still running. There's a cricket somewhere outside, just one, persistent as anything. I've been sitting in this chair a long time tonight. My back is starting to feel it. I think about what I'm leaving behind sometimes, not possessions. I have things that will go to Marcus and his girls. The properties will keep generating income long after I'm gone. That part is settled. That part I took care of. I think about what I'm leaving in people, in Marcus's memory of his father, in the way those 2 little girls look at their grandfather when I come to visit and they run to the door, in whether I was honest enough, present enough, real enough to leave something worth carrying. I think I was. Not perfect, not by any measure, but real. I was real with people. I didn't hide behind niceness or performance. When I was hurt, I took care of myself, and I faced it, and I came through. When I was wrong, I eventually found a way to admit it, at least to myself, which is where it has to start. I still have the envelope. That seems strange, I know. But I still have the private investigator's photographs in an envelope, in a box, in the closet in the spare room. I haven't looked at them in probably 15 years. I don't keep them out of bitterness. I don't think it's bitterness. I think I keep them the way you keep certain things from certain seasons of your life, not to return to them, but because getting rid of them would feel like it erased something. Like it said, that time wasn't real. It was real. All of it was real. I was a man who was betrayed by the people he loved, and I was also a man who made a plan in the cold months of the night and saw it through, who sat at his own table and laid the truth out on the good dishes and watched 2 people finally stop pretending. And then I got up the next morning and went to work, and the morning after that, and the one after that. That's most of what I have to say about it. I've been saying it for hours, and I think I've reached the part where there isn't much more to add. The cricket's still going. The refrigerator's still running. My back hurts. Marcus called this afternoon, actually, just to talk, just to check in the way he does. That weekly call I told you about. His younger daughter said something funny about her cat, and he told me about it, and I laughed. His laugh was in my ear through the phone, and it was the same laugh he's had since he was 8 years old, this specific laugh. And I felt grateful in a way I can't describe. Grateful and tired at the same time. Full of something. Dolores is probably in bed by now. Wherever she is, she's probably asleep. Calvin has been gone for 6 years. And I'm sitting in this chair, and the night is very quiet. And I was the husband, and the best friend, and the man who found out, and the man who planned, and the man who acted, and the man who lost everything and rebuilt it, and the man still sitting here in the small hours trying to figure out what all of it adds up to. I don't know what it adds up to. That's the honest answer. After everything, after all the years and all the choices and all the nights in this chair going over it, I still don't know what the sum of it is. whether I was more right than wrong or more wrong than right, whether the things I did made me a man who stood up for himself or a man who couldn't let go of his own hurt long enough to find a better way. Maybe both. Probably both. I'm just tired now. The good kind of tired. The kind that means the night is really over and morning is coming eventually, whether I'm ready for it or not. I'll probably sleep in this chair. I do that sometimes. Wake up with a stiff neck and the early light coming through the window and the whole house still. And for just a moment, before I'm fully awake, I don't know how old I am or where I am exactly. I'm just a person waking up, and that brief moment before everything comes back to me, that's a peaceful place to be.